Public debt did not resolve uncertainty. It organized it.
The American Republic emerged from the War of Independence burdened by a fractured financial legacy. Between 1775 and 1783, the Continental Congress had financed military survival through a patchwork of domestic loans, foreign borrowing, and depreciating paper instruments. Lacking taxing authority under the Articles of Confederation, Congress relied on requisitions from the states, which were irregularly fulfilled. By the late 1780s, public debt was not a unified national obligation, but a dispersed accumulation of unpaid soldier certificates, state-issued bonds, and foreign loans owed primarily to France and Dutch banking houses. The political question confronting the new federal government was not merely how to repay this debt, but how to transform it into an instrument of durable state authority. Alexander Hamilton entered this problem space in 1789 as the first Secretary of the Treasury under President George Washington. His appointment coincided with the ratification of the Constitution, which centralized fiscal powers previously denied to the federal government. The new framework authorized Congress to levy taxes, regulate commerce, and borrow on the credit of the United States. Yet constitutional authority alone did not guarantee financial credibility. The Republic faced skeptical domestic investors, wary European creditors, and an internal political landscape shaped by divergent regional interests. Hamilton's task was to bind these forces into a functioning system that could sustain public credit over time. The centerpiece of Hamilton's strategy was the federal assumption of state war debts. In his first report on public credit submitted to Congress in January 1790, Hamilton proposed that the federal government absorb approximately $25 million in state obligations, consolidating them with existing national debt into a single federal ledger. This was not a technical accounting maneuver. Assumption transferred the fiscal weight of the revolution from individual states to the federal center, ensuring that creditors' notched expectations would henceforth align with the survival and stability of the national government rather than local administrations. Assumption reconfigured the political economy of the early republic. State debts had been held unevenly, concentrated in commercial centers such as New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, where securities markets were already developing. By converting these instruments into federal bonds backed by national revenue, Hamilton effectively elevated private holders of public debt into stakeholders in federal continuity. The security of their assets became contingent on congressional taxation, executive enforcement, and institutional permanence. Public debt, once viewed as a residue of wartime desperation, was reframed as a mechanism for social alignment between capital and state power. This transformation depended on revenue structures capable of sustaining regular interest payments. Hamilton identified customs duties as the most reliable fiscal base given the United States' dependence on Atlantic trade. Tariffs on imports provided predictable income without immediate reliance on internal taxation, which remained politically sensitive in the post-revolutionary climate. Customs revenue flowed directly into federal coffers, servicing interest on bonds and signaling solvency to foreign observers. The system linked maritime commerce, bond markets, and government credibility into a single operational circuit. European finance remained an essential external constraint. Dutch bankers, including firms such as Van Staphorst and Willink, had extended credit to the United States during the Confederation period and monitored the new government's actions closely. Hamilton understood that repayment discipline and transparent fiscal administration were prerequisites for future borrowing. By consolidating debt, standardizing payment schedules, and prioritizing interest servicing over rapid principal reduction, he sought to establish a reputation for reliability within established Atlantic capital networks. By 1790, public debt had been repositioned from a symbol of fragility into a structural foundation of governance. This shift did not resolve political conflict, it reorganized it around new fiscal realities. The consequences of assumption would reverberate through institutional design, regional bargaining, and the long-term relationship between finance and federal authority. With assumption enacted in 1790, the problem facing the Hamiltonian system shifted from consolidation to maintenance. Public credit, once centralized, now required continuous reinforcement through market confidence, revenue discipline, and institutional coordination. The federal government had bound its survival to the expectations of creditors. Failure to meet those expectations would threaten not only solvency, but political authority itself. Debt was no longer an emergency residue of war finance. It had become a permanent feature of the American state, demanding routine administration and predictable behavior. The creation of liquid secondary markets for federal securities was essential to this architecture. Bonds issued under Hamilton's funding plan were designed to circulate, not to be held indefinitely by original creditors. Interest-bearing instruments, payable in specie, attracted merchants, speculators, and banking intermediaries. Trading activity concentrated in port cities, particularly New York, which rapidly displaced Philadelphia as the financial center of the Republic. Price fluctuations reflected assessments of government stability, legislative cohesion, and revenue performance, turning market valuation into a continuous referendum on federal credibility. Hamilton did not view speculation as a defect of the system. Market participation expanded the constituency invested in federal solvency. As securities changed hands, ownership dispersed across a widening pool of actors whose financial positions depended on uninterrupted interest payments. This diffusion of interest reduced the likelihood that any single region or faction could easily abandon federal commitments. Debt circulation, rather than debt retirement, served as the stabilizing mechanism. Revenue discipline was the system's limiting factor. Customs duties provided the fiscal backbone, but their sufficiency depended on uninterrupted trade and administrative enforcement. To secure collection, Congress passed tariff legislation and established customs districts staffed by federally appointed officials. These officers answered to the Treasury rather than to state governments, extending federal presence into everyday commercial life. Fiscal authority thus migrated from legislative abstraction into operational routine, embedding the national government within ports, warehouses, and shipping lanes. The Bank of the United States, chartered in 1791, further integrated finance and administration. Modeled in part on the Bank of England, the institution functioned as a fiscal agent for the Treasury, holding government deposits, facilitating payments, and extending short-term credit. Private capital dominated ownership, but public authority shaped governance through federal stock subscriptions and regulatory privileges. The bank stabilized bond markets by providing liquidity and anchoring confidence in the government's capacity to manage cash flow. Its existence reduced transaction costs and synchronized monetary circulation with fiscal needs. These arrangements were not politically neutral. Opposition coalesced around concerns that assumption in banking concentrated power among commercial elites and northern creditors. Figures such as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson interpreted the system as an inversion of Republican priorities, privileging financial abstraction over agrarian independence. Yet dissent operated within constraints imposed by the system's success. As long as interest payments were met and trade expanded, the material incentives for disassembly remained weak. International pressures reinforced domestic discipline. European conflicts in the 1790s disrupted trade routes and commodity prices, testing customs revenue reliability. Hamilton responded by prioritizing interest servicing even during revenue shortfalls, signaling commitment to creditors over fiscal flexibility. This choice constrained policy options but preserved credit standing. The United States remained a peripheral borrower within Atlantic finance, yet its reputation for repayment distinguished it from post-revolutionary regimes elsewhere. By the mid-1790s, the Hamiltonian framework had aligned institutions, markets, and political incentives around debt maintenance. The federal government did not merely owe money. It operated within a system structured to ensure that repayment remained the least destabilizing option. Debt had become a regulatory force, shaping administrative behavior and limiting ideological divergence through financial consequence. By the close of the 1790s, the Hamiltonian system had outlived its architect's tenure but not its influence. Alexander Hamilton resigned as Secretary of the Treasury in 1795, yet the institutional configuration he designed proved resistant to reversal. Assumed debt remained outstanding, interest payments continued as scheduled, and federal credit survived partisan turnover. This persistence was not accidental. The system had been constructed to embed fiscal obligation into the routine operations of government, making disengagement costly and destabilizing. The durability of the framework lay in its asymmetry. While political coalitions could shift through elections, the expectations of creditors operated on longer temporal horizons. Bondholders evaluated continuity, not rhetoric. As a result, successive administrations inherited constraints shaped by prior commitments. Even as Jeffersonian Republicans gained control of the executive and legislative branches in 1801, their capacity to dismantle the financial architecture was limited. Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin criticized aspects of Hamilton's design, particularly the scale of public debt, yet he preserved its core mechanisms. Customs revenue remained central, the bank continued to operate until its charter expired, and debt servicing retained priority. Public debt thus functioned as a transmission belt across political regimes. It disciplined ideological change by imposing reputational costs on fiscal deviation. Any abrupt repudiation or restructuring risked market retaliation, higher borrowing costs, and diplomatic isolation. The United States, increasingly integrated into Atlantic commerce, could not afford such disruptions without undermining its strategic position. Financial credibility became a form of soft power, influencing treaty negotiations, trade access, and foreign investment. The long-term consequence was the normalization of debt as a governing instrument rather than a temporary expedient. Federal borrowing reappeared during the Louisiana Purchase, the War of 1812, and subsequent territorial and military expansions. Each episode drew upon the same logic established in the 1790s. Future revenue streams justified present obligations, and capital markets mediated the relationship between state ambition and material capacity. Debt issuance did not signal failure, it signaled institutional maturity. This framework also shaped the internal geography of power. Financial centers gained structural advantages through proximity to bond markets, banking institutions, and federal revenue collection. New York's ascent was not merely commercial, but institutional, reflecting its role as an intermediary between government finance and private capital. Over time, this concentration influenced patterns of investment, infrastructure development, and political leverage, reinforcing regional asymmetries embedded during the Republic's formative years. Hamilton's system did not eliminate conflict over economic policy. Debates over tariffs, banking, and monetary authority persisted, re-emerging with intensity in later decades. However, these conflicts unfolded within boundaries established by the initial settlement. The federal government's right to tax, borrow, and service debt was no longer contested as a principle. It had become an operational fact reinforced by precedent and expectation. The assumed debt of the Revolution gradually receded into history, but the architecture it financed remained. Institutions learned to operate under conditions of permanent obligation, calibrating policy to preserve creditworthiness. The United States did not escape the constraints of finance, it institutionalized them. In doing so, it converted vulnerability into leverage, using public debt to anchor authority, align capital, and project stability across time. This transformation marked a decisive moment in the construction of American state power. Debt ceased to be a remnant of past struggle and became a tool for future governance. The consequences of that decision extended beyond Hamilton's lifetime, shaping the fiscal logic of the Republic well into the modern era.